All right, everybody. My name's Chaz Ballou. I'm the Aptible CEO. Thank you for joining us today for what is the first in what we'd like to be a quarterly update webinar. And what we'd like these webinars to do is to give you an overview of some of the products and features that we've shipped over the last couple months, and most importantly, give you a chance to hear from the engineers who have designed and built the products, and give you the opportunity to ask them questions. The agenda for today is Frank will introduce himself and then introduce sort of the products and the engineers. Our engineers will go through and talk about the products that they've worked on and the features that they've worked on, and then we'll have a general Q&A session at the end, any open questions that we have. So again, you can ask questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can direct questions or comments to the chat function as well. We'll be monitoring both of those as we go. There will be Q&A for each product, and then there'll be a general session at the end. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. We're happy to have you here. And with that, here's Frank.
Thank you, Chaz. First off, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. We've got many attendees, and that's great. We really enjoy this opportunity to tell you a bit about what we've been working on, some of the new features that we've added, and improvements to existing features. So I want to start by introducing or reintroducing Enclave. So those of you who have visited www.aptible.com recently may have realized that we did a bit of a rebrand and introduced two new products, Enclave and Gridiron. And we've gotten a lot of questions about what Enclave is and what it does. But the fact is, if you're already using the Aptible deployment platform, Enclave is just a new name that we've given it. We decided that it deserved a name of its own instead of just being called the deployment platform. So everything that we're talking about today is going to be related to Enclave, which is our platform as a service for deploying apps and databases in secure private VPCs. And it's separate from our Gridiron product, which we won't be discussing, but which is our SaaS tool for managing compliance. We have two of our engineers, our senior engineers from the Enclave team here today, Blake Pedersen and Thomas Orozco. They're going to be discussing a few different topics related to Enclave. So first, we're going to talk about deploying from private Docker registries. Then we're going to be discussing some platform upgrades. And we're going to finish with a discussion of new security features. Throughout the session, after every section, we're going to pause for Q&A. So I'm going to go to the questions that have been asked in the Q&A or sent directly via DM. You can send those to me. If they're relevant to that topic, we'll cover them right there. And if they're just general questions, not specific to that section, we'll cover them at the end. And I'd just like to point out that a lot of the changes that we're talking about today are new features released in the last couple weeks or so, so they may be very new, but others were released earlier this quarter, so you may have already used them. So today is a great time to ask the questions about those features that you've already been using. If you're unsure of how it works, or if you have questions of how to better use it, all of those are fair game today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Blake Pedersen, who's going to discuss deploying from private Docker repositories.
All right, thank you, Frank. So let me just do this. So as previously, we've always been able to use base images hosted in public Docker registries in order to extend it and add new functionality. We've also had a lot of demand for being able to extend private images as well. And well, after listening to you guys, we've decided that this is a feature that is very worthwhile implementing. So here it is. And it's available for all V2 stacks. So that means as long as you're not on our legacy infrastructure, I mean, you're free to use this today. I mean, it's available and it's working and everything. And in order to do so, it's very easy to use. So it's as simple as just setting a couple of environment variables. And this little demo here presumes that you're setting up an app from scratch, which of course you don't have to do. But all we have to do here is just to set a couple of environment variables before deploying. So Aptible private registry host in this case is, it's defaults to docker.io. So if you have a private repository on Docker Hub, you can just you can actually omit this. Otherwise, you have to specify the host. And Docker image, it's the same as in Docker itself. It's in the format repo/image name :tag, and the tag, as in Docker itself, it's optional, and it will default to the default branch. And if you have a private repository, of course, you would need to specify the username and password. So once you specify these environment variables, you set them, and then all you would need to do from here is to just add a proc file, which is still required in order to deploy, so we know what app you actually want to. We actually still need to know how to run your app at this moment. So just add the proc file, commit it, and then you push to the Git repository, and that's that. We'll pull your private image, and then we'll run it. That's pretty much that. And you can also extend your image, a private image. So you just add a Docker file to your repository, you extend what is in the Aptible Docker image, and as long as you extend with the same name, then there's no problem. Then you can do whatever you need to do with your private base image, and then we'll build it as usual, and we'll actually have the ability to pull this from the private repository. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Are there any questions?
So it looks like, Blake, we've got one question. So Alec asks if anyone has tried to use AWS ECR as a private repository. There's actually a couple. Alex also asked that. Blake, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, so that is something that there's several clients from what I recall that actually uses this. If I recall correctly, there is a constraint where you get a token that's only valid for 12 hours or so. And this, obviously, it's a bit inconvenient, which means that you would have to set like the private repository password, username, if it's been more than 12 hours in order to reset it. But yes, you can use it. It's albeit a bit more inconveniently than say Docker Hub or Key.io.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Blake. If anyone has other questions about private repositories that come up that they think of as we go, you can chime in and we'll answer them at the end. So without further ado, let's pass it off to Thomas, who's going to start by discussing some platform upgrades.
Thanks, Frank. All right, so I'm going to be talking about a set of upgrades we've made to the Aptible platform itself over the past quarter. So these changes are going to be, they're all going to be changes that for the most part, you don't really need to do much to take advantage of them, except for a selection of these, the more complex ones, you'll need to opt in. But for the other ones, for the most part, these are just things that we're making better for you without you actually needing to do anything for them to happen. And so all throughout this, I'm going to be comparing what we have, what we had before to what we have now that these changes have shipped, so that you can get a good understanding of how this impacts your apps and how it makes them, ideally, well, we like to think at least much better. So there's going to be three sections here. Reliability will be one, how we're making the platform more reliable, how we're making sure that your apps stay up and running better, essentially, and even in the face of unlikely or unfortunate events. Introspection is going to be about letting you know what's happening on Aptible for your apps, and for control, about letting you change some things that Aptible is doing on your behalf. So we'll start with reliability and jump right into memory management. So let's talk about what it is. So currently what we do, and like without memory management, what happens on Aptible is that we don't enforce memory limits on containers. This means that if you have one container that's like a 1 gig container and ends up using 2 gigs of RAM, Aptible will not stop that. Now, of course, we do use like the scale that you shoot at the dashboard. We do use that to make decisions as to the size of the infrastructure that's like underpinning your apps, like the number of EC2 instances we deploy to run your containers. You use, of course, like these scales for that. However, like once you're on the instance, every container is essentially free to do as it pleases. And if one container uses too much RAM, Aptible will not, without memory management, Aptible will not do anything about that. And this can be unfortunate if you have like one misbehaved app that ends up using too much RAM. Like one example will be Kibana. Kibana tends to not garbage collect very often unless you configure it for. And in which case, like Kibana's memory usage is just going to grow over time. And maybe you expected Kibana to use like 200 megs of RAM. It ends up using a gig of RAM. And maybe it's a bigger app that ends up using multiple gigs of RAM. When that happens, the thing is that the underlying instance has a limited amount of RAM. So if you have one app that's misbehaved like this, you might end up getting your production apps running on the same instance affected. You'll have less RAM for them, and they might, like if we run out of RAM, they might get like killed by the kernel, which would be very unfortunate. And so this is what memory management is going to solve. Rather than let like Kibana use too much memory, memory management will step in and kill Kibana to protect your other apps, essentially. And now, why should you care? Well, the reason is that this is going to be good for you for 2 reasons. The first one is that an app like Kibana that's misbehaved will actually be restored. So memory management will kill it, and then immediately after it's dead, it will restore it. So the upside is that even if Kibana is not managing its, I'm sorry if I'm like putting a lot on Kibana, but that's just like a practical example. Of course, Kibana is not the only one. But like if Kibana is using too much RAM and then gets like killed by the kernel, which is what happens without memory management, then Kibana is just dead and you don't have Kibana anymore, which is unfortunate. And you need to run like an Aptible restore to get it back. However, with memory management, what happens is that we'll kill Kibana, restore it, and you essentially get Kibana back. So even if the app isn't managing its memory really properly, it will like continue limping along. So you still have Kibana. It's not running perfectly. Once in a while, it'll die for a few moments. But at least it's mostly like it's up there for the most part, which is convenient because that means that Kibana being like misbehaving it's not an emergency for you. You'll fix it when you have time. And much more importantly, this means that other apps aren't affected. This means that even if Kibana is using too much RAM, then your production app, the one you really care about the most, the one that doesn't leak memory, this one will continue running just fine and will not see its memory usage reduced by will not see its memory like stolen essentially by Kibana or like another misbehaving app. So to talk about how this works, so restarts will always happen in place. This means that if like, again, using Kibana as an example, just an example, but a good one, if Kibana uses too much memory, then we'll send a SIG term to all the processes in that container and essentially tell them, using too much memory. We will, if there is enough free memory, we'll also give them a little bump in RAM to let them like essentially give them a bit of a shot at exiting cleanly, but if there isn't, we'll just kill them. And when we do that, we'll also notify all of your log drains so that you can know this happened and keep an eye on it, at least check that the app is still running just fine, and so on. There is one thing to keep in mind, is that since we're restarting your apps in place, we are not running like an Aptible restart. This means that you'll be using the same container when the app is being restarted. Now, some apps are running like pitfalls and may not like behave properly when that happens. So before enabling this, and we'll talk about how you do that in a bit, you'll want to make sure that your apps can work properly with it. And there's a flag on Aptible Restart you can use for this, which is used like this one, Aptible Restart Simulate And this will like show you what would happen if your app went out of memory. So there's like a compatibility checklist. You can like get the slides after the webinar and just like access this link to learn a bit more about it. And speaking about next steps, so this is already live on all shared stacks, but it is opt-in for production stacks right now. Like we have a set of customers that are already running this in production, but you don't for other customers, it's not there yet. So if you want to get memory management, just opt in by contacting support. Note that eventually this will become mandatory, but most likely after a pretty long rollout period. Any questions?
So Thomas, it looks like, so there were a couple questions about notifications for when apps are restarted. And so I think Chaz has answered those in line, but that's indicated on the slide that you included that describes how we log these events. So these events get logged to your log drains, and there's a very recognizable log message there that you can see when it gets killed.
Yeah, I should mention, we'll talk about this in just a moment, like a little bit later in this presentation, but like this is actually flagged a little differently, so your log drains can filter for events coming via Aptible. But essentially, yes, your log drain will be sent a message saying container is restarting and dropping what you're seeing here, which is more or less like what top or like PS would dump, and essentially then you understand what is exceeding your memory. And I can see there's another question about whether this applies to databases. Containers. So when you enable memory management on your stack, what will happen is that only new containers will have memory limits enforced. So that includes databases, but only new ones. And likewise, it only includes new app containers. So if you want to put your databases under memory management, we'll need to briefly restart them. That can happen very quickly, but it still has to happen. Otherwise, like they will be unconstrained. But this is also pretty convenient for you. Because it means that if you have like a large number of databases that you haven't looked at just yet to see how they would behave with memory management, then you can push that back a little bit until they're restarted. You don't need to do anything. Anything else, Frank?
So there's one more question. And it's whether it uses Docker's memory limit or our own restart logic, and if so, how fast is the restart triggered? I think you may have mentioned this, but if you want to just recap that.
Very briefly. So yes, we do use Docker's memory limits. What happens then for the restart is that it happens immediately. What will happen is that if you hit your memory limit, the process will get suspended. It will not be able to do any work anymore. And rather than running your process, we'll be running our memory management agents that will restart your process and release a bit more memory for it. And the restart happens immediately as the process hits its memory limit, and it has 10 seconds to exit before being restarted.
Cool. Thanks, Thomas. I think that's it for now. But if others have questions, just keep asking them.
All right. So moving on to ALBEs. So ALBEs is another feature we released, this one much more recently. So let's, again, compare to what we had before. So right now, what we use for endpoints on Aptible is ELBs. But given how ELBs work and how Aptible works, like sometimes we see like short downtime when you're updating an endpoint. Typically during a deploy, the endpoint might go down for like a few, we've seen like often it's just a couple of seconds. We've seen one or two extreme cases where it might have taken like over a minute. So this used to practically never happen. We never saw that before, but now we're seeing it more often. Like it's becoming more prevalent over the past few months. So to resolve this, we started working on a solution that essentially doesn't have this problem, and this is what ALB endpoints are. ALB endpoints will never you'll never see any downtime when updating an app using an ALB endpoint. And in fact, you'll even see something better. You'll see connection draining, which is not available in ELBs right now, but is available in ALBs. So when you're doing a deploy on an ALB, not only will you not see any short downtime when we update the ELB, but even better, your old app will continue serving traffic for a few moments until the new app essentially starts accepting traffic. There are a few other fundamental differences between ALBs and ELBs. The main one that as a user you want to be aware of is that on an ALB you can't customize the HTTPS settings, meaning that outside of false SSL, which redirects from HTTP to HTTPS. So this means you can't set disable weak cipher suits, and you can't set custom ciphers or custom protocols. That being said, the default that we provide on ALBs, which is what AWS actually provides on ALBs, the default is more or less equivalent to what disable weak cipher suits would otherwise do. So by default, you will end up having an SSL configuration that gets you an A+ on SSL Labs and perfect forward secrecy on all modern browsers, which in most cases is actually what you want. The one downside to be aware of is that if you have to support super legacy clients like Windows XP, that might not work. So that'll be a trade-off. That being said, a large part of the internet no longer supports SSL v3 anyway, which you need to support Windows XP. So this might totally be like a reasonable trade-off. Finally, the last difference is we've made other changes at the level of like how we set up DNS for ALBs. And one of the results of this is that if you're using an ALB, even if like your entire app infrastructure is down, like the entire AZ goes down, like you're supposed to still have actually access to your maintenance page. We'll serve that by making updates by using like a failover at the DNS level, which will result in if your app is down and there's no container responding anywhere, we'll still be serving a maintenance page. Rather than the behavior right now, which would be to show like a connection closed error, which is not ideal. Especially if you have like end users that don't really understand what this means. Right now, they'd see like a connection closed. What does that mean? With the new system, you'd see like your maintenance page being served. So we do have a few future plans for this. One of them is that since using ALBs, we're terminating HTTPS at the load balancer level. This means we can hypothetically support sticky sessions, which have been a request we've seen coming quite a bit, especially to support, say, like Socket.io. So this is something we'll be investigating a bit more in depth, but this is on our roadmap right now for ALBs. However, for ELBs, we don't have any like future development plans right now, which is why we encourage you to migrate. We might use ELBs to support TCP endpoints in the future, but that would be the only like use case for them at this point. So as far as next steps are concerned, so like ALBs will become the default very soon. We haven't made them the default just yet because we wanted to do a gradual rollout, but we do already have some customers using ALBs in production right now. That being said, like if you need to upgrade an existing endpoint to become an ALB, this is like a zero downtime operation, but there are a few like prerequisites that we'll have to walk you through. So to upgrade at this point, you're encouraged to do so, and to do so, just contact support. Tell us which endpoint you want to upgrade, and we'll explain how this works, what you'll need to do, and what you need to look at before we do the migration. And once that's all done, we'll just do the migration for you, and there again will be no downtime at all. And then you'll enjoy all these features I mentioned before, including like those perfectly zero downtime deployments.
So Thomas, we got one question, and then if there's others, we'll take them at the end. But so Jake asks that is the default on ALB to support only TLS v1.1 and 1.2?
I would actually need to check. I am pretty sure, however, that this we know it actually includes SSL TLS 1.0 as well. But let me actually check this really quickly. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to also support TLS v0. Yes, it supports TLS 1, TLS 1.1, and TLS 1.2. So if you are using custom SSL protocols to restrict a set of protocols, you would indeed not be able to carry that over to ALBs. So it'd be up to you to figure out whether this is an acceptable trade-off or not. We are hopeful that eventually AWS will let us configure the SSL policies on ALBs. Right now, that's just not the case, unfortunately.
Thanks, Thomas.
All right. And our last feature in terms of reliability is HTTP health checks. So let's again compare to what we had before. So before HTTP health checks, what we had were like TCP health checks. The way it worked is that like our endpoint would periodically make like TCP requests to the instance hosting your app containers, and if that succeeded, then we'd consider an instance to be up. The thing is that, well, this will detect like brutal, like very clear failures, like the instance is down and all the containers on it are dead. But this would be detected by a TCP health check, which is good. However, more subtle failures, like the instance is too busy, and although it's accepting connections, there's not enough CPU to even serve them, or the app container itself died, but the instance is running just fine. These are cases where the current TCP health check logic would not actually send traffic away from the affected instance, which is, like, again, really unfortunate because it means that you have an instance that's down. We could reasonably easily find that out, but we're still sending traffic to it. And this is what HTTP health check will solve. Using HTTP health checks, what happens is that we make sure that we're able to establish an end-to-end connection between our endpoint and your app. And if that succeeds, we'll be sending traffic to it. If not, then we'll never send traffic to it anymore. Unless, of course, the app comes back up, in which case we will. And again, this is good because it ensures that really, like, regardless of the cause, if your app is not responding, we'll stop sending traffic to it within less than a minute. What's great about this feature too is that you don't have to do anything to take advantage of it. In fact, if you've deployed your app, or like deployed or restarted or rebuilt your app since October 14th, about 2 weeks ago, you already have this feature. It's already live for you. If not, as soon as you restart, it will be activated, and you'll take advantage of those. You don't need to do anything on your app to take advantage of this, although we do realize that in some cases, the traffic that we're sending to your app for those end-to-end checks has created like additional logging, or like reporting that wasn't expected. So like in this case, we're sorry about this. We didn't fully anticipate that those errors would have happened, but hopefully, like seeing how like this feature will improve the reliability of your apps, we can all agree that this is like for the greater good. But in practice, this will like create a bit more log traffic. It's all going to be for like the /health check pass. So if you're seeing requests to /health check every 15 seconds, this is where they're coming from. Finally, we do have some future plans here. Right now, our health check will only check for the ability to connect to your app, and it will check that we're able to like make a connection, but we will not look at the response from your app. This means that if your app returns like a 500 because your DB connection is not working on this app, or I don't know, we will not be respecting that. We'll still send traffic to it. That being said, we have plans to make those health checks a little smarter and let you opt in to having meaningful status codes. Meaning your status code would be, you know, this is like a 500, don't send me any more traffic. In which case we would like stop sending traffic there. Of course, this would require app level changes. Right now, I think everyone's probably responding with like a 404 or 4XX of some form. So this would require like some changes on your apps. So this would be like an opt-in change when this would ship. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that health checks are here to make sure we send traffic to live app instances, but the app containers. But if your app is scaled to 1, that they're not going to help you at all. So do make sure that you scale like production apps to more than 1. Doing so, we're able to send traffic to lively apps. If you only have 1 app container and it's dead, we'll be able to tell that it's dead. We'll be able to serve your maintenance page, but we will not be able, of course, to do anything about that. Any questions?
We've got one question here, Thomas. How often do the HTTP health checks run?
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned 15 seconds a little earlier, but I think it's actually 20 seconds. They run every 20 seconds, and you have 15 seconds to respond. These like numbers might change. We might choose to like lower them. Again, like the more often we check and the less time we give you to respond, the more likely we're to hit like false positives. So for now, this is the default, but this might also become something you can configure if you want to have health checks that respond faster.
Okay, great. Thanks, Thomas.
All right. All right. So next is features about introspection and essentially understanding what the Aptible platform is doing for you. So the first one is Aptible Logs v2. So if you've been using Aptible for a while, you probably know that we used to have, like, of course, when I'm talking about Aptible Logs, I'm talking about the CLI command, Aptible Logs. Like, you know, we used to have this feature, then it went away, and now it's back. Of course, if you started using Aptible recently, it's always been there. So talking a little bit about how this works, Aptible Logs will like provision a log train for you that essentially buffers your logs for a little bit and then streams them as soon as you connect to Aptible Logs. One important thing about this is that, so the first thing is it's pretty convenient. If you want to see exactly what's getting into your log trains, Aptible Logs on V2 will always see the exact same thing because it is a log train in the first place. That being said, if you want to use, like, you can totally use it also like for like its main purpose, which is like troubleshooting your app, debugging, and so on. Unlike the V1, Aptible Logs will work like through a restart and so on. So even if your app is being redeployed, restarted, and so on, Aptible Logs V2 will continue like always connecting to the newest logs and so on. just like a log train, essentially. So not only does it work on V2, it's also like a substantially superior implementation to what was on V1. So yeah, as I mentioned, use this for debugging, live troubleshooting. That being said, make sure you don't use it for long-term retention. Aptible logs will not process your logs. We make no guarantees as to how long we'll retain them. In practice, we'll try to buffer like 30 minutes of your logs. But if you have like a large amount of log traffic, we might buffer less. Like there's a limit on how much memory we'll allocate to these logs. So the more log traffic you have, the less logs we'll be able to keep. But by default, we'll keep up to 30 minutes. Most customers do not, in fact, hit this limit. It's in fact a reasonably large allowance just for logs. And speaking of logs, we also introduced, as we talked about before, like something I'm informally calling platform events. So this is what memory management does. We're starting to feed some data into your log trains that isn't necessarily coming from your app itself. So in the case of platform events, this can be like messages coming via memory management. Memory management will step in and say, I'm restarting this container. You probably want to know this, so let me send you a log message. So this is probably like our first foray into that area. That being said, if there's like any like other things you'd like Aptible to notify you about, I'm sure there's like a lot of these. Let us know. Like this is something that at least I'm personally interested in seeing what we can do with this. So right now, again, it's a pretty small subset of events, and it's only if you have enabled memory management. But if you have other things you'd like to hear about, let us know. Maybe via support and so on. We'd be happy to hear about how you might want to use this. And now talking about like our final section on our final introspection feature, which is container metrics. Again, this one has been around for a while now, so I'm going to go reasonably quickly over it since like most of you are probably already familiar with it. So container metrics are metrics that are available in your dashboard for like both your apps and your databases. You can use them to look back like 1 hour or 1 day and like see if there's like potential performance bottlenecks. Maybe you have an app that's like using too much CPU. Maybe you have an app that's using like too much RAM, I don't know. So you'll be able to see this. I should mention that there's also something we use internally quite a lot. When you have like a performance problem or you see an app getting killed and so on, this is typically the first place we'll look at to know like what might have caused your app to go down. And I'll talk about this in just a bit as well. First, to review what we have for you. So like memory is, of course, what you want to be looking at, especially in the context of what I mentioned before, memory management. So this one is actually a pretty good example. You can see that right now we do not enforce memory limits because this database is scaled to a 1 gig container, but is actually like scaled to 2 gigs, using 2 gigs of memory. So memory is probably a good place to look at before you want to enable memory management on your stack. You'd probably want to look at the memory graphs for all of your apps to see if you're like below your allowance, and if not, you might want to scale. The data we show is coming directly from Linux, from the actual C groups that represent your containers. So this is all like, if you have any experience looking at like the output of free, for example, these numbers will mean the same thing. So you're looking at RSS, you're looking at buffers and caches and so on, just like you would be normally looking at them on Linux. Of course, we also have load average. There again, not much to say. So load average, for those that don't know, represents the number of tasks that are runnable on your container or blocked. This means essentially the number of tasks that you'd be running if your disk was infinitely fast and your CPU infinitely powerful. The higher this number, like it being like spiking like this is not necessarily a fundamental problem. It's okay if your load average spikes once in a while. That being said, in the case that we're looking at right now, the real concern is that the load average never goes below like 2 or 3, which would be a concern. This means that there's always at least 2 tasks waiting to run. This particular container is probably a little undersized. Or at least like the end users of it that are making requests to this database would probably see some delay. Finally, for databases only, these weren't actually available when we shipped this feature, but they became available a few weeks afterwards. Disk I/O lets you see how much I/O traffic your database is pushing to disk, which is convenient if your database is essentially there's a limit, which is what your volume can provide. If your I/O reaches that limit, you probably need a bigger volume to have a higher limit. for like disk usage, this one's pretty simple. If your usage meets your limits, then you're out of disk. And you can't write to disk anymore, so you probably want to avoid that and get in touch with support to resize the database before that actually happens. And that's that's it for the overview of container metrics. Did we have any questions, Frank?
There's one question from Bo. If there's current or future plans for forwarding container metrics to Elasticsearch, a metric strain, or someplace else, some way to track longer-term trends.
Yeah, that's definitely something. Well, you opened this, Bo opened the support ticket too, where you asked the same thing. So we've had a short discussion about it, but the bottom line is yes, this is something that we know is needed, and that we definitely want to find the good way to make it work. I don't think that we haven't exactly found out how to do that just yet. What we probably at least want to do next right now is to offer you better resolution into the metrics that you get. Like right now, you can see metrics only for the currently running containers, and you see them with like a resolution that's pretty low. And it's pretty common, in fact, for us to send the customer metrics from our internal dashboard that has more detail. So our next step for metric is probably let you have access to making a snapshot of your metrics and storing it. Then maybe importing it somewhere else if you want, but giving you better access so that you can use essentially a purpose-built tool, something like Grafana, for example, to read through them. So that's probably our next step. Once we have that, I fully agree that ideally we want to be able to ship those metrics to you, perhaps for alerting and so on. To be fair, the bigger concern might be that I don't know that we're sure to tell exactly how these metrics should be formatted to be generally useful. But as you mentioned, Elasticsearch might indeed be a good place to start. So to recap, yeah, we're not working on it right now, but we fully understand that this is something that people want. And I personally, having worked on this feature originally, that's something I want to do because I agree that this would make this feature infinitely more useful.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
All right, and so this is we're getting near the end of this. So let's talk about control briefly. So the other main change is on-demand backups. So as you probably know, if you've been using Aptible for a while, hopefully as an Aptible customer, you were aware of that, but we make automated backups for you. And we've done that forever. So every night we make a backup, every day, to be more precise, we make a backup of your database. And we'll, and we just keep it in AWS and we copy it to 2 regions. What has changed recently is that not only can you initiate a backup now, but you can also restore it yourself. So to make a backup, to create a new one, this is something you can do via the CLI. You can do this at any time. So this is typically convenient if you have you're about to run a scary migration and you want to make sure that if something goes sideways, you can recover. You typically want to make a backup at this point. So you can do it via the CLI, or you can also, if I remember correctly, do it via the dashboard too. Just keep one thing in mind. Don't schedule a dozen backups at the same time, because making multiple backups in parallel will have some impact on your performance of the underlying database. But other than that, you can make as many backups as you want. And of course, once you have those backups, you probably want to do something about it. So you can restore a backup to a new database via the CLI as well, using this Aptible Backup Restore. Keep in mind that this will always create a new database. We get questions like this sometimes, this will never erase a database that you have. This will always create a new one, waste the data in. So this is this can be convenient, of course, if you want to recover after the database. If the database migration does in fact go sideways, this is always a last resort that you can use. Alternatively, restoring from backups can be pretty powerful as well if you're trying to test the migration before running it, if only to know how long it might take and so on. You can run the migration against the backup. We do that pretty often ourselves for our own apps, and we know that many customers do so as well. I should mention that we're storing backups, like whether the backup is automated or not has no impact whatsoever. We treat those backups as exactly the same thing. Frank, do we have any?
So we did have a question, which I can grab, about master-slave replication. So we do, while not directly part of the backup and restore feature, we do support replica configurations or cluster configurations for 4 different database types. So specifically Postgres, MySQL, Redis, and MongoDB. The first 3 are read-only replicas, and then MongoDB is actually a it's a primary and secondary cluster configuration. So that's it for right now on that.
All right. Cool. And so to finish off with like a few security features we shipped as well, like over the past few months. One is 2-factor authentication. So I'm sure many people are aware of this. We have several hundred users already using this. So it's available on Aptible. It is using OTP tokens only. So essentially the Google Authenticator app or like a similar one. We have, I should mention, we have no plans of supporting SMS authentication since it was deprecated by NIST recently. However, we do support recovery codes. So just like a public announcement, if you have 2FA enabled on your account, make sure you copied those codes. And if you haven't, do so, well, not now, but do so after this webinar. It's a good idea to keep those. They'll help you like regain access to your account should you lose your 2FA device. Of course, if you lose your 2FA device, otherwise you'll need to have an account admin, which is not you, of course. Contact us to deactivate 2FA on your account. And finally, our last security feature is called Managed HTTPS. So this one is, well, I guess putting it in security was more for the sake of convenience. Essentially what it does is it's a feature built on Let's Encrypt that lets you have HTTPS without doing any like any headaches, essentially. You just say, I want an endpoint with HTTPS, and we'll like, you tell us which domain you're gonna use, and then we'll make sure to renew the certificate and create it for you. So if you haven't tried it yet, go ahead. We have like about, I think 10% of endpoints on Aptible are using this feature already. So if you haven't given it a shot yet, you might want to do so. Note that the certificates, these provisions are also pretty short-lived. They're actually like for about 3 months, which is pretty convenient too in terms of like security. In case something goes wrong, the private key itself will not be worth much beyond that short like lively period. And I think this is about it. Frank, I'll let you take it back.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Thomas. So I'm just trying to round up the remaining questions. If there are other questions, either about these security features or anything else we've discussed today, please ask them. I'll give people a couple minutes to do so. And while I'm doing that, I'll just...
I can see one, I'll answer now.
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, the question was, have you considered supporting Docker CPU usage constraints? Would that be a useful feature? My answer is yes, definitely. We have considered supporting it, and we have plans to support it in practice. It would actually be reasonably easy to add. There are a couple of reasons why I want to support this. Of course, the first one is that is to complement what memory management does. Right now, if you have a noisy neighbor in terms of RAM, it will get killed. If you have a noisy neighbor in terms of CPU, it will not. So that's something we want to add to have like a better coverage in that regard. That's the first reason. The second reason is that this will make performance more predictable. Right now, it's pretty common to have an app that performs better in staging than in production, simply because like when you're in staging, you're like essentially getting free CPU because the instance is much beefier because it's running a lot more containers, and you're getting a lot of free CPU that you wouldn't otherwise actually get. So this would make performance a lot more predictable. Finally, the last upside of doing this, we would want to enforce bandwidth limit in CPU, which would make it very easy for you to tell if you're using too much CPU, because you'd be able, like via metrics, you'd be able to see, hey, I'm actually being throttled there, and you'd see a graph that tells you how many seconds you spend throttled. And essentially, whenever that graph takes off from there, and if it stays too long, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly at this point, my app could have been running faster if I had a bigger CPU allowance. So for these three reasons, yes, definitely this feature would be something we definitely want to support. We just haven't gotten into it just yet.
Thanks, Thomas. So there's a couple related questions that came in, which I can grab. So Maxime asked if there's any plans to support opening multiple ports per container. And Alex asked about exposing arbitrary TCP ports. And so these are actually related features. So while we do have plans to support both of these using a common feature, which would be TCP endpoints as opposed to HTTPS endpoints. In other words, you would be able to expose an arbitrary number of ports on your container and expose them as plain TCP ports rather than putting an HTTP load balancer in front of them. We do plan to develop that feature. We don't have it's not in our current work items, unfortunately. Just based on the frequency with which it's been requested. But eventually we do plan to offer that. I just don't have a time estimate yet. But that feature would cover both of those cases, arbitrary TCP ports and exposing multiple ports on a container. There's a question here from Alex about using plans to support ALBEs routing options. So kind of like that higher level routing options on ALB, whether we ever have plans for that.
I can take this one. So the answer is that ALBEs don't this would not be something we implement using ALBEs, mainly because right now, the expectation is that if you're running an app on Aptible, you have to expose one HTTP port, and then we serve you both HTTPS and HTTP traffic over that port. If we started letting you point your app, put an ALB directly at your app, that would break that expectation and be a compatibility issue in that regard. That being said, using TCP endpoints, you'd be able to, which is the feature Frank just mentioned, using TCP endpoints, you'd essentially be able to take control of your own SSL termination. So if you wanted to, you would not be using the ALBs for this. But the idea is that once we have TCP endpoints, which again, are not live yet, once we finish that feature, you'd essentially be able to do your own SSL termination and not depend on our Nginx routing layer. So this, yeah, again, would come via TCP endpoints.
There's one more. So Alex asks if we have plans to provide smaller instance types. So to give some background now, our container sizes we have a default container size of 1 GB of RAM and a proportional share of an M-class CPU, M3 or M4 class, depending on when the instance was launched. You can go smaller. The smallest container size that we currently support is 512 megabytes of RAM and a smaller proportional CPU footprint. And we support up to 8 gigabytes of RAM through the UI, and then through a support request, you can actually scale up larger than that, up to 16 or 32 gigs of RAM per container. We do not have plans to support smaller than 512 megabytes, that footprint that we currently support.
I think that was one question I can see about I was going to answer about health checks. The question was, can we control and limit which app containers receive health checks? The answer is no. And the reason is that we use those health checks to know if your app is running. So they're part of essentially us guaranteeing that we keep your apps up and running. So intuitively, we don't want to let any container opt out of this because if we did so, that would mean we might end up sending traffic to a dead container. That being said, if you have a strong use case for this, feel free to open a support ticket so we can at least talk about it. Because otherwise, I'm not sure exactly why you might want to do this, considering that the main impact of doing this would be to make your app fundamentally less reliable. So if I'm misunderstanding your question, feel free to file a support ticket and we can have a conversation about this so I can better understand what you're after here.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So the last question that we're going to grab today, if we didn't get to your question, or if you have a question afterwards, of course, feel free to reach out to us on support, and we're happy to continue this conversation. Adam asked early on, are we planning to support Kafka or other event sourcing tools? We have gotten a couple requests for Kafka. We periodically get requests for supporting different database technologies. We love getting these requests. And I mean, that's ultimately how all of the databases that we do support today as managed Aptible databases, how they came to be supported. Unfortunately, Kafka is not at the point where we're planning to work on it immediately, but every time that we get a feature request from a customer for this, we do consider that. So if you have a use case and a need for a database technology that Aptible doesn't currently support, please just ask us, fire a support request, and we'll let you know if it's in progress, or we'll let you know, that we're considering it. And the final thing that I just want to point out is to everybody here who attended this session, thank you so much again. Be sure to follow the Aptible blog. So just go to our website and click on blog, or just go to www.aptible.com/blog. Many of the features that were discussed here today are actually, they have topics on the blog. I think Gib shared a couple links in the chat window at right too. In addition to the blog, you can follow us on Twitter. We post blog links there. And finally, if you use the Aptible dashboard, when we release a new feature, there's an announcements option in the top right nav dropdown. So you can click on announcements. You can see the previous announcements for each of these blog posts when the feature was released, and you'll get a pop-up notification whenever there's a new one. And with that, I'll just hand it back to Chaz to wrap things up. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, thanks everybody for joining. This webinar was recorded. We'll send you a follow-up email with links to the video plus the slides that we presented. If you found this to be helpful, the next webinar we're planning on will be in January. In the meantime, if you have any questions or feature requests, just drop us a line at support@aptible.com, or if you have a priority issue, you can go to contact.aptible.com and flag an issue with priority marking. You're also free to email any of us directly, just our first name at aptible.com. If there are any other questions that we haven't answered or flagged in the Q&A or the chat, we'll follow up with you. And again, just like Frank said, thank you all for joining. We appreciate it. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.